When I speak to you in my courtroom, you stand. The words cut through the stillness of courtroom for be like a gavel striking bone. For a suspended moment, even the ceiling fence seemed to pause in its rotation. Judge Desmond Langford leaned forward from the bench, his silver hair catching the harsh fluorescent lights, his black robe draping around him like an unyielding wall of authority. Every face in the room turned toward the woman seated near the witness stand, a black woman in a navy blazer, her hands resting calmly on the wheels of her chair. Captain Lena Whitaker did not move. She did not raise her voice. She did not lower her eyes. She simply met his gaze with a silence that carried the weight of unspoken histories, a quiet that unsettled the room more than any outburst could. Outside, rain traced thin silver lines down the tall courthouse windows, softening the edges of the American flag standing in the corner beside the judge's bench. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of old wood, damp wool coats, printer ink, and quiet fear. Darius Holt sat at the defense table, his shoulders hunched beneath a worn suit that hung loosely on his frame. He had once been a soldier as well, though no one in that room seemed willing to remember it now. To them, he was simply another black homeless veteran facing a system that had already cast its judgment. Lena had come because she had witnessed what happened outside the bus station on West Peachtree Street. She had seen Darius step between a frightened child and a man whose shouting would not cease. She had seen him bring calm to the chaos, not ignite it. But the police report had been tittier than reality, and tidy lies traveled fast through rooms like this one. "Ma'am," Judge Langford said again, slower this time, each word edged with impatience. "This court requires respect." A few people shifted in the gallery. Someone near the back released a quiet breath that almost resembled a laugh. Lena felt it brush against her skin, not the sound, but the old assumption beneath it, the same burden she had carried through airports, hospitals, base gates, and grocery store aisles. The belief that if she did not perform obedience precisely as expected, she must be defiant. Her fingers tightened once around the metal rim of her chair, then eased. The chair was not new. The left tool gave a faint click whenever she turned, a small mechanical murmur she had long since learned to ignore. Her right sleeve covered the edge of a faded military tattoo. In her lap, hidden beneath a folded statement, lay an old set of dog tags, their chain wrapped twice around her palm. Judge Langford watched her from above, and the room watched her from every side. "I said stand up." He snapped. Lena drew in a slow breath. The sound was small, yet it filled the space. Rain tapped against the glass. Darius turned his head, his eyes pleading with her not to risk herself for him. The bailiff took half a step forward, uncertain. The prosecutor looked down at his papers as if the floor had suddenly become the most fascinating thing in the room. Lena lifted her chin, not in anger, not in pride, but in the steady manner of someone who had endured far louder rooms than this. "Your Honor," she said softly, her voice calm enough to make the silence bend around it. "I would if I could." Lena Whitaker had learned long ago that silence could shield a person better than any argument. She had learned it in waiting rooms where doctors spoke over her as if her body rendered her invisible. She had learned it in grocery stores when strangers grabbed the handles of her wheelchair without asking. She had learned it at the veterans' office on Peachtree Street, where the flag outside snapped proudly in the wind while the line inside moved so slowly that men with trembling hands eventually gave up and went home. She carried years that sometimes made her feel older than the calendar suggested, though some mornings the ache in her lower back reminded her of battles fought long after the uniform was put away. Before the chair, before the paperwork, before the careful ramps and narrow doorways, and voices that were polite in the way that never truly was. She had been Captain Lena Whitaker of the United States Army Medical Corps, the kind of officer who remembered every blood type in her unit and every birthday her soldiers tried to pretend did not matter. She had grown up outside Columbus, Georgia, in a small brick house where her mother worked double shifts at a county clinic and her father kept his dress blues pressed in the hallway closet long after he retired from the Army. Respect, her father used to say, was not something you begged for. It was something you carried so steadily that others eventually had to notice its weight. Lena had carried that lesson through basic training, through field hospitals, through sandstorms, through the long flight home when the lower half of her body no longer answered her commands. She had not planned to become a witness in a criminal case. That morning, she had only intended to refill a prescription, pick up coffee, and return home before the Atlanta rain turned the sidewalk slick. Then she saw Darius Holt outside the bus station, standing between a frightened boy and a shouting man in a gray business coat. Darius had not raised a hand. He had not threatened anyone. He had spoken gently, one palm open, the other guiding the child toward the station doors. Lena remembered the boy's red backpack, the steam rising from a sewer grate, the way commuters looked away because trouble was easier to ignore when it wore someone else's face. Moments later, police lights painted the wet pavement in blue and red, and Darius was the one in cuffs. The man in the gray coat was giving a statement. The child was gone. Lena had rolled forward before fear could talk her out of it. She told the officers what she had seen. They wrote down only half of it. When the public defender called days later, her voice tired but urgent, Lena agreed to testify because she knew what happened to men like Darius when no one stood beside them. Now she sat in courtroom for B, beneath the weight of every stare, listening to Judge Langford treat her stillness like an insult. The wooden arms of the witness chair beside her were polished smooth from years of hands gripping them in fear. She could smell the rain in the wool coats behind her. She could hear Darius breathing carefully at the defense table. And beneath her folded statement, the dog tags in her palm had warmed against her skin, as if the past itself had opened one eye. Judge Desmond Langford had built his reputation on the belief that mercy made a courtroom weak. Over many years on the bench, he had sat above defendants, witnesses, lawyers, grieving mothers, angry fathers, and frightened teenagers with the same carved expression, as if emotion were dust that could be wiped from the bench at the end of the day. His courtroom was known for order, no ringing phones, no late arrivals, no hats, no raised voices unless they belonged to him. The lawyers in Fulton County whispered that Langford could make a man feel guilty just by adjusting his glasses. He liked that. He liked the clean geometry of power, the witness below, the judge above, the flag to his right, the seal behind him, the law in his mouth. He came from an old Atlanta family with portraits in private clubs and names on buildings, where people like Darius Holt entered through service doors. His father had been a state senator. His grandfather had been a judge before him. Langford had inherited more than property. He had inherited certainty, and certainty was the most dangerous thing a man could wear under a robe. He did not call it prejudice. Men like him rarely did. He called it instinct. He called it pattern recognition. He called it knowing trouble when it walked through his door. To him, Darius looked like trouble with his tired eyes, untrimmed beard, and second-hand suit that did not quite fit. Lena looked like interruption with her calm face, dark skin, and refusal to rise when commanded. That was all Langford allowed himself to see, not the quiet discipline in her shoulders, not the military neatness of the folder in her lap, not the way she spoke with restraint while the room pushed shame toward her like a cold draft. The prosecutor, Derek Shaw, stood near his table with a clean blue tie and the relaxed posture of a man who expected the day to end in his favor. The business owner who had accused Darius sat behind him, dry beneath an expensive raincoat, his jaw set in injured dignity. Across the aisle, Public Defender Maya Ellison looked overworked but awake, one hand resting on a stack of papers marked with yellow tabs. She had seen enough of Langford's courtroom to know when a case was sliding downhill before the testimony even began. The bailiff stood near the wall, uncertain whether to treat Lena as a witness, a problem, or both. Langford looked down at all of them and felt the familiar satisfaction of control returning to his hands. He had not asked who Lena was before demanding respect from her. He had not wondered why a woman would sit so still under pressure. He had only seen a black woman who did not obey fast enough. Outside, thunder rolled softly beyond the courthouse roof. Inside, Langford tapped his pen once against the bench and said, with the patience of a closing door, "Miss Whitaker, this is not a place for theatrics." Lena did not answer the accusation right away. She let the word theatrics settle between them, let it reveal itself for what it was. Then she placed both hands on the wheels of her chair and rolled forward with quiet precision until she was beside the witness stand rather than behind it. The small click in the left wheel sounded louder now, steady as a clock in a room where everyone had forgotten to breathe. "Your Honor," she said, "I came here to tell the truth about what happened on West Peachtree Street." Judge Langford's eyes narrowed. "You will answer when questioned." "Then let me be questioned," Lena replied, not sharply, not disrespectfully, but with a firmness that made Maya Ellison lift her head. The public defender stood quickly. "Your Honor, Captain Whitaker is my witness. Her testimony goes directly to the facts of the case." The word captain moved through the courtroom like a match struck in darkness. A few people looked at Lena again, this time searching for what they had missed. Langford looked annoyed, as if the title had been placed in the room without his permission. "Counselor, control your witness." Maya swallowed, but she did not sit. "She is controlled, Your Honor. She is also present, ready, and material." The prosecutor gave a small sigh, the kind men used when they wanted the room to know they were being inconvenienced by someone else's dignity. Lena kept her gaze on the bench. She could feel Darius watching her from the defense table, could feel the pressure of his hope pressing lightly against her back. She remembered his hands outside the bus station, open and calm, guiding that child away from the curb. She remembered the business owner stepping backward, face red, voice loud enough to draw a crowd. She remembered the first officer arriving and looking at Darius before looking at anyone else. That was the moment the story had started changing. Not when the truth changed, but when power chose which version sounded easier. "I saw Darius protect a child," Lena said. "I saw him de-escalate a situation that could have frightened that child for years. He did not go there looking for trouble. Trouble was already there, and he stood between it and someone smaller." Langford's jaw tightened. "Miss Whitaker, you are not here to make speeches." "No, sir," she said. "I am here because a man with no address is still a man. Because a veteran sleeping near a bus station is still a veteran. Because a black man in worn shoes should not become guilty faster than a white man in a clean coat becomes believable." The room went still. Not loud still, deep still. the kind that moved under the skin. The business owner shifted in his seat. Derek Shaw looked down at his file, then up again, trying to measure where the air had turned. Maya's fingers rested on the edge of her table, frozen halfway between fear and gratitude. Lena heard rain slide along the glass behind her. She heard the soft hum of the lights above the judge's bench. She heard her own heartbeat, slow and disciplined, as if some part of her had returned to a field station where panic could cost more than pride. "Careful," Langford said, his voice slower now. "You are walking very close to contempt." Lena looked at him for a long second. "Your Honor," she said, "with respect, I have spent my life being careful so other people could survive their worst day. I am not careless now." Darius closed his eyes. The bailiff looked away, and for the first time since Lena entered the courtroom, Judge Langford seemed less certain of the distance between the bench and the woman below it. Judge Langford's face did not change at first, and somehow that made the room feel colder. He looked down at Lena as if he were deciding whether she was a witness or a warning. The gavel rested near his right hand, polished smooth from years of ending other people's sentences. He picked it up slowly, not striking it yet, just letting the movement remind everyone where authority lived. "Miss Whitaker," he said, each syllable pressed flat. "This court will not tolerate accusations disguised as testimony." Lena held his gaze. "Then ask me what I saw. I decide what this court needs to hear." His voice rose, just enough for the back row to straighten. "And what this court needs right now is order." He turned his attention toward Maya Ellison. "Counselor, if this witness continues down this path, I will consider sanctions." Maya's lips parted, but Lena spoke before fear could take the room back. "Your Honor, the child was wearing a red backpack with a cracked plastic dinosaur clipped to the zipper. He was about 7 years old. He was crying so hard he could not answer the officer when she asked his name. Mr. Holt handed him his bus pass so he could sit inside out of the rain. That detail is not in the police report." A murmur passed through the gallery before the gavel came down, sharp and final. Enough. The sound struck the walls and disappeared into the heavy air. Darius flinched, then lowered his eyes. The business owner behind the prosecutor sat very still now, his expensive coat folded across his knees like a shield. Derek Shaw stood, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, the state would ask that the witness be instructed to limit her answers to direct questions." Langford nodded before Shaw even finished. "Agreed." Then he looked back at Lena. "You seem to believe your personal feelings outweigh the rules of this courtroom." Lena's hands remained folded over the dog tags beneath her statement. "No, sir. I believe the rules should be strong enough to hold the truth." A soft sound came from the back row, not laughter this time, but a breath caught too late. Langford's eyes hardened. "One more remark like that, and I will hold you in contempt." The word landed with weight. Contempt. It had a courtroom sound, official and clean. But Lena knew what it meant when aimed at people who already carried too much. It meant sit down, be quiet, know your place. Let the record say what power wants it to say. She felt heat rise behind her eyes, but no tears came. She had promised herself long ago she would not give strangers the satisfaction of deciding what broke her. The bailiff shifted again, uncomfortable now. Maya stepped closer to Lena, her voice low. "Captain Whitaker, let me handle this." Lena nodded once, but her eyes stayed on the bench. Langford mistook the nod for surrender. "For the last time," he said, leaning forward, "stand when you address the court, or you will be removed until you learn how respect works." The courtroom went so quiet that the rain outside sounded like static from an old radio. Lena looked down at the wheels of her chair, at the worn rubber, at the silver spokes, at the small scratches earned from ramps that were too steep and doors that were too narrow. Then she looked up again. Her voice, when it came, was almost gentle. "Your Honor, I learned respect in places where nobody had a bench, nobody had a robe, and nobody needed to be above another person to prove they mattered." Langford's mouth tightened. "Bailiff," the single word pulled the air from the room. Darius pushed back from the defense table. "Please, Judge, she is just trying to help. Mr. Holt." "Sit down," Langford snapped. Maya raised both hands. "Your Honor, removing this witness would severely prejudice the defense." But the bailiff had already taken the careful steps toward Lena's chair. His face conflicted, his duty moving faster than his conscience. Lena did not resist. She did not plead. She simply placed her statement on her lap, straightened her shoulders, and held the dog tags so tightly the edges pressed into her palm. For a moment, the fluorescent lights reflected off the metal chain. A brief flash of silver that caught Maya's eye. Something in the public defender's expression changed. Recognition. Or maybe instinct. She reached for the folder beneath her legal pad, the one Lena had given her that morning and told her to use only if necessary. Judge Langford lifted the gavel again. He thought he was seconds away from restoring order. He did not understand that order had already failed, and the truth was about to stand in the room without legs. The bailiff stopped one step short of Lena's chair, and in that small distance the whole courtroom seemed to pause between what it was and what it could still become. His hand hovered near his belt, not threatening, only uncertain, as if no training manual had prepared him for a woman who looked back without anger. Lena noticed the tiny crease between his eyes. She noticed the rainwater darkening the shoulders of people in the gallery. She noticed the flag in the corner standing perfectly still, its gold fringe dull beneath the fluorescent light. Everything became sharp in that silence. The scrape of a shoe under the prosecutor's table, the soft rustle of Maya Ellison opening the folder, the tired hum of the building above them. Lena breathed in through her nose, slow and measured, the way the Army physical therapist had taught her after the injury. When pain and memory arrived together and tried to take the room away from her for a brief moment, courtroom 4B faded into another kind of waiting. Not a battlefield, not the noise people imagined, but the strange quiet before a medical evacuation, when everyone listened for rotor blades that were still miles out. She remembered dust on her lips. She remembered the weight of a radio in her hand. She remembered a young soldier named Julian Langford blinking up at her with rain-colored eyes and asking if he was going to see Georgia again. She had told him yes, because some promises had to be spoken before they were believed. The dog tags in her palm were his, though Judge Langford did not know that yet. Their edges were warm now, pressed into the lines of her hand like a second pulse. Lena looked at the judge, and for the first time she saw not only the robe, not only the arrogance, but the tired man underneath it, a man who had mistaken control for strength so many times he could no longer tell the difference. That did not excuse him. It only made the room sadder. Maya stood slowly. "Your Honor," she said, and her voice trembled once before it found its spine. "Before the court removes this witness, the defense asks to enter Captain Whitaker's service record and disability documentation into evidence, for the limited purpose of establishing why she cannot comply with the court's order." Langford's gavel remained raised, frozen above the bench. "This is unnecessary," he said, but the words came out thinner than before. Mayo held up the first page. It is necessary, because the court has repeatedly demanded that she stand. A hush passed through the gallery. Not a murmur, not a gasp, just a human stillness gathering weight. Lena closed her eyes for one breath. If this moment touched your heart, remember that some people carry their service where the world cannot see it. When she opened them again, she was still in the chair, still in the courtroom, still surrounded by judgment, but something had changed. The truth had not shouted. It had simply placed its hand on the door. Maya Ellison's hand did not shake when she unfolded the service record, but Lena could see how hard she was fighting to keep it that way. The page looked ordinary from a distance: white paper, black print, a government seal at the top, but the air around it changed the moment Maya read the first line. Captain Lena Denise Whitaker, United States Army Medical Corps, to tour overseas. Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, Army Commendation Medal. The words did not sound like praise in that room. They sounded like evidence. Judge Langford lowered the gavel without striking it. His eyes moved from the document to Lena, then back again, as if the woman before him had suddenly become difficult to measure. Derek Shaw shifted at the prosecutor's table, no longer wearing the relaxed expression he had carried in with his clean blue tie. The business owner behind him swallowed and looked toward the windows. Maya continued, her voice steady now. Medical discharge following spinal cord injury sustained during a rescue operation near Kandahar province. Mobility impairment permanent. Wheelchair use medically necessary. The last sentence landed softly, but it landed everywhere. In the gallery, someone covered their mouth. The bailiff stepped back from Lena's chair as if ashamed of how close he had come. Darius Holt bowed his head, his shoulders trembling once before he pressed both hands flat on the table. Judge Langford's face lost color slowly, not all at once, but the way light leaves a room when a storm covers the sun. That is enough, he said quietly. Maya did not stop. She lifted another page, this one protected in a clear sleeve, edges worn from being handled too many times. There is more, Your Honor. The rescue report lists for soldiers evacuated under Captain Whitaker's supervision after a convoy accident during severe weather. One of those soldiers was Specialist Julian Langford. The name moved through the courtroom like a door opening in a house everyone thought was empty. Judge Langford went completely still. His left hand gripped the edge of the bench. For the first time all morning, he did not look like a judge. He looked like a father who had heard a voice from a room he had locked years ago. Repeat that, he said, barely above a whisper. Maya's eyes softened, but she obeyed. Specialist Julian Langford. Lena felt the dog tags in her palm grow heavier. She had carried them for years, because Julian had pressed them into her hand during his recovery and told her he wanted her to keep one set until he earned the right to laugh about that day. He had made it home. He had walked through his mother's kitchen in Savannah. He had lived long enough to sit on a porch with his father, long enough to send Lena a Christmas card with a badly drawn peach tree on the front. Langford stared at Lena now, and whatever certainty had lived behind his eyes began to crack. You knew my son, he asked. Lena opened her hand. The silver tags lay across her palm, catching the courthouse light. Yes, Your Honor, she said softly. He asked me to tell Georgia he was coming home. Judge Langford did not speak for several seconds. The courtroom waited with him, trapped in the space between recognition and shame. The dog tags in Lena's palm shone beneath the fluorescent lights, the small pieces of metal carrying more truth than the whole morning had allowed. Langford stared at them as if they were impossible. as if the past had rolled quietly into his courtroom and stopped at the foot of his bench. His son's name was there, Julian Langford. The letters were worn at the edges, softened by years of touch, but still clear enough to break something open in him. "He never told me," Langford said, his voice so low that even the rain seemed to lean closer. Lena's expression did not change. "Some soldiers do not talk about the people who carried them home, Your Honor. They just try to live worthy of it." Langford closed his eyes. For a moment, he saw Julian at 23, standing in the kitchen in Savannah with one hand on the counter, laughing because his mother had made too much cornbread. He remembered the way his son had avoided questions about that night overseas, how he would only say that a captain with steady hands refused to leave anyone behind. Langford had pictured a man. He had pictured someone tall, perhaps white, perhaps decorated in the way his own mind had been taught to recognize heroism. He had never pictured the black woman in the wheelchair he had just humiliated in open court. That was the part that cut deepest. Not only that he had been wrong, but how quickly he had believed he was right. The gavel slipped from his hand and rested against the bench without sound. Maya lowered the record. Darius Holt looked at Lena with something close to reverence, but she did not turn toward him. Her eyes remained on Langford, not accusing, not forgiving too quickly, simply waiting for him to become honest. Langford removed his glasses. His fingers were unsteady as he set them beside the case file. "Captain Whitaker," he said, and the title sounded different now, no longer inconvenient, no longer decorative, but earned. "I owe you an apology." Lena breathed once, slow and quiet. "You owe Mr. Holt a fair hearing." The answer moved through the room more powerfully than anger could have. Langford looked toward Darius, really looked this time. He saw the worn suit. He saw the nervous hands. He saw a veteran who had been reduced to an address he did not have and a suspicion he did not deserve. The judge's throat tightened. "You are right," he said. Then he turned back to Lena. "And I owe you more than words." Lena rolled the dog tags gently between her fingers. "Words are where some people begin." Langford nodded, absorbing the mercy without mistaking it for weakness. "The court will take a brief recess," he announced, but his voice no longer carried the old iron. It carried weight and regret and something human struggling to stand. "After recess, this witness will be heard fully. The defense will have all reasonable time to establish the facts. The court also orders the state to produce any available station surveillance and body camera footage related to the incident." Derek Shaw stood quickly. "Your Honor, the state has not reviewed every supplemental file." Langford looked at him, and the room felt the old authority return, but turned in a different direction. "Then review them now." Shaw sat down. The business owner behind him looked suddenly smaller inside his expensive coat. Lena lowered her eyes to the dog tags. She had not come here to expose a judge's grief. She had come because Darius had stood between a child and fear, and because truth deserved at least one witness willing to say it plainly. Langford stepped down from the bench before anyone expected him to move. The room stiffened as he approached Lena, but he stopped several feet away, leaving her space, leaving her dignity untouched. "May I see them?" he asked. Lena studied him for a long second, then extended her open palm. He did not take the tags. He only bowed his head enough to read his son's name, and when he saw it, his face folded inward with quiet grief. "He made it home because of you," he whispered. Lena's voice stayed gentle. "He made it home because a lot of people refused to give up on him." Langford looked at her then, and for the first time that morning, he was not above her. He was simply in front of her, a flawed man standing near the truth. "Captain Whitaker," he said, "I am sorry." Lena did not smile. She did not punish him with silence, either. "Then hear Darius," she said. "Not as a case number, not as a problem, as a man." Langford nodded once, and that nod carried the first honest judgment he had made all day. When the court returned from recess, the room no longer felt like the same room. The rain had softened outside, leaving thin trails of water on the tall windows, and the gray morning light had turned silver across the polished floor. Judge Langford took the bench slowly, but this time he did not seem to climb above anyone. He sat down, looked at Darius Holt, and asked Maya Ellison to proceed. No one interrupted when Lena testified. Her voice stayed even as she described the bus station, the frightened child, the red backpack, the cracked dinosaur clipped to the zipper, the way Darius had kept his distance and used calm words when everyone else had chosen noise or silence. Then the footage arrived. A courthouse clerk carried in a laptop, and the small screen became the only thing anyone watched. The station camera was grainy, the sound poor, the colors washed by rain, but the truth did not need beauty to be clear. Darius was exactly where Lena said he had been, one hand raised in peace, his body angled protectively between the child and the man in the gray coat. There was no threat in him, only restraint, only concern. The prosecutor's face tightened as the body camera footage confirmed the same thing from another angle. Derek Shaw stood after a long silence and requested dismissal in the interest of justice. The words sounded formal, almost small, but Darius heard them as if a locked door had opened. His hands covered his face. Maya touched his shoulder. Judge Langford granted the motion, then paused with his pen still above the order. "Mr. Holt," he said, "this court failed to see you clearly when you entered it." Darius looked up, unsure whether he was allowed to answer. Langford continued, his voice quiet enough that people had to listen. "That failure ends today." He signed the order. The case was dismissed. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Darius stood, not proudly, not dramatically, but like a tired man remembering the shape of his own height. He turned toward Lena and she gave him a small nod. The kind soldiers give when words would make the feeling too heavy. Langford stepped down from the bench again, holding Julian's dog tags carefully in both hands. Lena looked at them, then at him. "Keep them," she said. His eyes lifted, startled. "Are you sure?" Lena's fingers rested lightly on her wheels. "He was your son before he was my memory." Langford's face tightened, but he did not hide from it. He closed his hand around the tags and bowed his head. "Thank you, Captain." Lena did not answer. She simply turned her chair toward the aisle. The gallery parted without being told. As she moved past the rows, the left wheel made its faint, familiar click against the courthouse floor. Darius walked beside her for 3 steps, then stopped, overcome, while Maya stood with one hand pressed to her chest. At the back of the room, the bailiff straightened first, then an older woman in the gallery rose, then a young clerk, then Darius, then Maya, one by one. The courtroom stood not because the judge ordered it, not because tradition demanded it, but because the truth had finally taught them how. Judge Langford remained near the bench, Julian's dog tags resting against his palm, watching Lena roll through the open doors into the brighter hallway beyond. Sunlight broke through the clouds outside and stretched across the marble like a quiet flag. Lena did not look back. She did not need to. Behind her, the room stayed silent, and in that silence, justice sounded almost like respect.